A conference realignment bombshell may have just been dropped on us, and a lot of people may have missed it. And that bombshell is in regards to private equity and how it could kill or how it could save the Big 12 Conference going forward. We're going to have that conversation in this show, which is brought to you by BetUS Online Sportsbook and Katz, Cantor, Stone Street, and Buckner Attorneys at Law. And we're going to have it right after this. Since 1931, the attorneys at Katz, Cantor, Stone Street, and Buckner have been the voice for victims who have suffered serious injury or death. They have a fierce passion for truth and justice and a sincere compassion for those who have been wronged by others. Whether you have been in a car accident or fighting with an insurance company, or you or a loved one has suffered serious injury or death due to medical negligence, we will ensure your voice is heard loud and clear. Katz, Cantor, Stone Street, and Buckner will ensure there is justice for all West Virginians because we are your lawyer, your voice. Visit us at yourlawyeryourvoice.com. What is up, and welcome into another edition of Couz's Corner. For those of you who are new here, I'm your host, Couz. Come on in. Let me serve you up this shot of top shelf college football news and analysis. In this episode, we're centering everything around conference realignment and a bombshell that may have just been dropped on us that we may not have even realized was a bombshell. But when you start tying all the pieces together, I think it kind of is. And it's in regards to the potential dissolution of the ACC, the use of private equity, and how this private equity could potentially save or kill the Big 12, and how it all ties together. I'm going to try my best to tie it together for you here in the show. I'm going to try my best to get to the point quicker. I had a comment that said I didn't do that, but I'm going to try my best to, but it's going to be hard to do it here because I have a lot to unpack. So bear with me. Greg Flugar on his show, College Football Speak Around the Corner, yesterday, and I'm recording this on Monday, December 30th. On his show last night, he talked about how there is a meeting scheduled, potentially, according to his sources. There is a meeting scheduled in spring of 2025 between leaders of several different universities to discuss private equity. Now, the caveat to this meeting is that it's not just leaders of from a specific conference. There could be leaders from the ACC and leaders from schools in the Big 12 meeting together. So this is not a conference-sanctioned meeting. It's several schools getting together to talk about private equity. Because there are schools in each conference who want to use private equity, and there are schools in each conference who don't want to use private equity. And it appears that this meeting could potentially be between schools who are interested in private equity. And this brings us to the dissolution theory of the ACC and how that impacts the leagues. And the first scenario we're going to talk about is this potential forming of a new conference if the ACC dissolves. And Greg has said in multiple shows that the dissolution theory is indeed back on the table again for the ACC, where he didn't think it was in the past. If you can get 10 teams in the ACC to vote to dissolve the league, the grant of rights, it's my understanding the grant of rights would be null and void. Now, but the thing is, those schools have to have a home in order for that to make sense. So one of the scenarios was, hey, these 10 schools, they just form a whole brand new conference. They lose the dead weight in the quote unquote dead weight, the least valuable schools in the ACC. They form their own league and they get to keep more of the revenue, which, oh, by the way, would be brought in with the help of private equity. You'd have schools like Florida State, Clemson, Miami, maybe Louisville, maybe a Duke, maybe a UNC, an NC State, a Virginia Tech, right? Maybe a Syracuse, whoever, maybe a Pitt, whatever the 10 schools are. It's even feasible. And I've heard from one of my sources that Notre Dame is very much in the picture here. It is very possible Notre Dame could be on board with voting to dissolve the ACC because they could also benefit from it. If they see that the ACC is dying on the vine, they may vote to dissolve it and help form this new league to be in this new league. And it's also possible they make some agreement with this new league to keep their football independence. And maybe this new conference adds another team or two or a few, and maybe those schools just happen to be from the Big 12. Maybe West Virginia is part of the picture. maybe even a Cincinnati or a UCF. I don't know. I'm not, to me, if you go add those three schools, then why didn't you just keep the SEC or the ACC in place? But I don't know how these schools are being looked at or valued by these private equity firms. And also, Greg said something in his show that caught my attention. I don't know how many people caught on to this, and maybe Greg was just using this as a generality. I haven't had the chance to ask him yet, but he made a comment that schools from the two leagues that are, and he used the term across the phrase across the river from one another. Now, I don't know if he was just speaking in generalities, but there is a river. It's called the Ohio River that separates Kentucky from Ohio. So could it be Louisville and Cincinnati that are part of this? There's also a river that separates West Virginia from Virginia. That river is called the Potomac River. So could it be Virginia and West Virginia in talks? Could it, in talks with private equity? Could it be Virginia Tech in West Virginia? I don't know. I'm just, again, that was just me taking that phrase Greg used across the river and, again, trying to fit the pieces together like a puzzle, which I like to try to do in my head and see where this stuff may tie in together. So, is it possible that West Virginia and or Cincinnati, West Virginia and or UCF are part of this discussion to form this new conference? I don't know. Again, I have no idea if that's true. It's totally speculation on my part, but when you hear across the river, most of the other schools in the Big 12 are too far away from the ACC to be across the river. So if Greg meant that term, if he used that term for a reason, then I'm trying to decipher it. Again, maybe it was just a general term. Now, and again, it's very possible Notre Dame could want to do this. Now, I think this scenario is a long shot because it would require so many moving pieces for this to come together. You'd have to get more networks involved, likely to get a TV deal, maybe TBS or, maybe Warner Brothers, maybe Netflix jumps in. We've seen Netflix be involved in live sports lately. Maybe they are part of the equation. Maybe CBS wants to get involved and get more live college football coverage than what they have now. There's a lot of moving parts here. I mean, there could be some interest from TV networks, and there also could be interest from private equity firms. If you get a conference with the top 10 brands of the ACC, potentially even including Notre Dame, with a couple of brands from the Big 12 that would produce rivalry games within that league, like Louisville, Cincinnati, like West Virginia Pitt, like West Virginia, Virginia Tech, like West Virginia Louisville, just throwing out a few names here, that would be an attractive conference, I think, for TV networks. Now, there is a second scenario as well that could be playing out here. Now, and the second scenario would be better for the Big 12, whereas the scenario I just mentioned could potentially hurt it. Now, would it kill the Big 12 if they lose a couple teams from the East or all three of their teams from the East? No, I don't think it would. So maybe the word kill is not, maybe it's extreme, but hey, we've heard reports that Baylor's president, Linda Livingstone, has also shown some interest in talking with private equity and potentially using private equity at the conference level. So maybe there are schools outside of the Eastern time zone in the Big 12 that want to do this move. Maybe they could be involved in these discussions as well. So if you get enough teams from the Big 12 that want to bring private equity in and you have a bunch of others that don't, the schools that want to bring in private equity could get tired of the other schools holding them back, and they could break off and try to do their own thing with some of the ACC schools. I see that as a potential scenario there. Again, it would all come down to how valuable that league would be and what kind of rivalry games you could round up and the overall value from a private equity standpoint and also from a TV valuation standpoint. That's why, to me, this could be a dangerous scenario for the Big 12 and could potentially kill it, or at least it would kill the Big 12 as we know it. Right? Now, before we get on to the second scenario, I do want to remind you that if you are looking for a brand new sports book, look no further than our good friends over at BetUS Online. Right now, BetUS offers a deal. On your very first deposit, you can get a 150% sign-up bonus with promo code YouTube150. Again, promo code YouTube150 at checkout. Get you a 150% sign-up bonus on your first deposit. You can also get a 125% bonus on your next two deposits, up to a grand total of $2,000. If you do decide to play, please make sure you play responsibly. And if you or a loved one has a gambling problem, please call 1-800-GAMBLER for help. Now, let's get back to the show and let's dive in to this second possible scenario here. And this scenario is where private equity could actually help the Big 12 and also fall in line with this ACC dissolution theory. Like I mentioned earlier, but in order for this ACC dissolution theory to work, the teams have to have a home, right? And if the forming of a new conference isn't feasible, if that's not on the table, if that's not going to happen, maybe the schools break off into separate conferences. And this is something that has been brought up multiple times in the past. And then, all the talk was, with Florida State and Clemson being the two schools who have sued the ACC to get out, they have been kind of the two under the microscope. But reports came out this past summer from Brett McMurphy that the SEC nor Big Ten were interested in adding Clemson or Florida State, but they would be interested potentially in adding a team like North Carolina or Virginia because it gives them new states and a new footprint in their league. So let's just imagine for a minute that that's true, that the SEC is not interested in Florida State and Clemson, but they are interested in UNC and Virginia. Maybe Virginia and UNC are part of the schools that dissolve the league, and those two schools go to the SEC. And maybe, just maybe, the SEC wants those two schools bad enough that they're even willing to take Virginia Tech and North Carolina State with them to avoid lawsuits from the states and keep those schools all together. That would put the SEC at 18 teams. You'd have an 18-team conference, and you'd have you'd basically get most of the state of North Carolina and most of the state of Virginia if you did that, as far as TV viewership. Then you might ask, well, what's going to happen with Florida State and Clemson, Couz? Well, what if Florida State and Clemson do have the option of going to the Big 12? What if that is actually on the table? And I know a lot of Florida State and Clemson fans don't want to hear that. But if you come over to the Big 12, along with a couple other ACC schools like, Miami and Louisville, it's a pretty strong league. You have Clemson, Florida State, Miami, Louisville, West Virginia, UCF, and Cincinnati could kind of be your eastern wing of the league. Maybe you even add one more team to get to 8. I don't know. But nonetheless, to me, that's a pretty attractive list of schools right there. You get the state of Florida. You get the state of Ohio. You get the state of South Carolina. I mean, heck, you got 3 schools in the state of Florida all in one conference. And the only power school you don't have in that case would be Florida. That's a pretty, you pretty much have the state of Florida sewed up, with the exception of the Gator fans. Pretty attractive, don't you think? And that is a way you could use private equity to save the Big 12. If the ACC dissolves and the Big 12 is able to go out and get Florida State, Clemson, Louisville, Miami, those schools, the use of private equity could help those schools elevate their revenue. Maybe the Big 12 even has to give them a larger share, or at least give Florida State and Clemson a larger share of the revenue to make it happen. There's a lot of different ways you could make this work. And that's a way that the Big 12 could use private equity to save itself. And maybe that's the only way you get the schools who don't want to use private equity in the Big 12. Maybe that's a way you convince them to do it, is to say, hey, if we use private equity, we can grab Florida State, Clemson, Louisville, Miami, 4 solid brands who bring us much higher TV viewership. create more rivalry games in our league, give us a wider footprint in more states, and a greater footprint in Florida, which all these schools want to recruit in, right? How would that not be attractive for recruiting when you can get 2 more Florida schools in your conference? It would be awesome for the conference. Again, I know that wouldn't be great. I know Miami, Florida State, and Clemson fans may not like the idea. Louisville fans may not even like the idea. But I think it could work. And it would be a valuable enough league with those brands to be attractive for potentially a better TV deal down the road come 2036, or I'm sorry, 2031, and also potentially get you some private equity money today, even sooner than 2031. And I know there's the issue of Notre Dame, and you're going to say, but Couz, what happens to Notre Dame if that happens? Well, in this scenario that I'm speaking of, Notre Dame could end up in the Big Ten, and I don't think Notre Dame wants to go to the Big Ten. Their first option is always to remain independent. I know that's what they want, and they're probably going to do whatever they can to make that happen. But in this scenario, NBC may be willing, and even in any scenario, take this scenario out of it. Based on what I'm hearing from sources, NBC is willing to up the ante as far as how much money they will pay to have Notre Dame in a conference, especially the Big Ten. If NBC can get the games they would want, if they could keep Notre Dame on their network at 3:30 p.m. on every Saturday, they might be willing to up the ante and pay more money to a conference like the Big Ten to have Notre Dame in that league. And who would Notre Dame likely bring with them to the Big Ten to even out the numbers? Stanford. And I'm pretty confident I did a video on that several months ago, how Stanford may actually be the +1 for Notre Dame in any conference move. Not Florida State, not Miami, but it could be Stanford. And we all know Stanford meets the academic requirements or criteria or wishes, whatever word you want to throw out there, of the Big Ten. I mean, heck, Stanford could be an Ivy League school if they wanted to be, right? There's not a school that meets the Big Ten standards more than Stanford. And it gets them another school in the Western footprint to go along with UCLA and Cal and Oregon and Washington. And it gives Notre Dame a partner to join the league with, who they were really, really close with. Maybe that entices Notre Dame to go to the Big Ten. Maybe this is the only way. Now, the news that came out today by Brett McMurphy over at Action Network, he's saying that, a lot of the conference leaders aren't happy with the college football playoff seeding. They don't like the way automatic buys are being given to the conference champions. They want it to go to the 4 higher seeds. If that happens, that would incentivize Notre Dame not to join a conference, and it might make it harder for this ACC dissolution to happen, in my opinion. But we will see. We will see. I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. I know that was a lot of information, and it was a lot to unpack. So be sure to any questions you have, throw them to me in the comments section. Also, please be sure, if you did like the information I provided and the angle I came at this from, please hit the thumbs up button. Please share it with your family and friends. Want to give a quick shout out to my VIP members of this episode. These are paid members of the episode, or paid members of the channel, I should say. You can join as well. Go hit the join button in the description box or over on my channel homepage. Or there's one right below here. If you're watching on your mobile device, there should be a join button right below the video. The VIP member shout outs of this show are Luke Bart, Cody Cutright, Brad Cheney, Jeremy Croy, and Vernon Sheldon Witter. Thank you all for your continued support of the channel. Also want to give another shout out to my 2 sponsors, BetUS Online Sportsbook and Katz, Cantor, Stone Street, and Buckner Attorneys at Law. Thank them for helping keep the lights on. If you're in West Virginia or Virginia, Katz, Cantor, Stone Street, and Buckner are your attorneys for medical malpractice or personal injury cases. Give them a call at 304-999-HURT or look them up at yourlawyeryourvoice.com. Thank you for tuning into the show. Hope the rest of your day's top shelf. Check out the video in the corner of your screen. And Q Country Roads.